Okay, everything's working. Yep, so let's jump into the second PowerPoint. And we are dealing with, let me see if I get a pen here. Communication and mission. Part 2. So this is, tracking along with the textbook if you get that. So the textbook, I think it's a good textbook. You might not, and that's okay. The last one I used was really for grad school. It was super intense, and I thought it was too intense, for us. This is an excellent text. It's been used, it's in the second edition, and the second edition is 1991, so you can see how long that is. So it's fairly well time-tested, and what I like about it is Hesselgrave is kind of a missiologist, so he isn't just dealing with the technical aspects of this is what communication is, this is how you communicate in different cultures, and a lot of the technical aspects that you might get in the other book, which is still a good book. But he mixes in the relevance of then communication to mission, and I think that's significant. And he also gets into enough technical detail as well, and a lot of that you could just let roll away, if it gets to be annoying after a while or frustrating because you say, I don't get that, I don't know what that word is, I don't understand that. That's okay, just keep plowing along. So what is the relevance then? Communication. Why should we care about it in terms of mission? That's where we're going. So we have perspectives from the science of communication. This can get a little involved and a little detailed, but we'll try to survive it. So what we're going to talk about here, the basic model of the communication process. The basic model of the communication process. This is probably central to the entire course. It is super simple, but it's also central. It is easy to grasp, so there won't be any problem with anybody saying, I don't get it, I don't understand it. Believe me, it's super simple, it's super intuitive, and yet it is very important, and when you see it in action, matter of fact, you see it in action all day long. Virtually all day long. So let me just throw it up here. So virtually all day long, you are living out this simple, of course, you don't think of it in terms of these words up here, but all day long, all of your interactions with your fellow students or anyone on campus, anyone, I would say, even texting someone, however you are communicating, you're following this model right here. However, the level of difficulty becomes greater I would take a step back. You don't have to think in terms of this model to follow it. This is just so native to how we communicate. But once you know the dynamics of this simple, and you can elaborate on this, but once you know the simplicity of the dynamics involved in this, you'll see how it relates to other cultures. So we could talk levels of difficulty. For example, what's the culture here on campus in terms of values? Just in terms of values, right? So you have relatively, the vast majority of persons on campus are of the same age group in general, right? So you have, 400 students here, all of whom are, or all of which are relatively around the same age, and same kind of general background. This is an institution that's here in the United States. You're coming from different states within the United States. There's some minor adjustments that you make in terms of culture. You have some international students. Now, international students, that's kind of cool because then you really could see, the difference in culture and in communication. So a Christian young person growing up in Europe, depending on what the European country is, coming here with a vastly majority, let's say, of American students would have a bit of a culture shock and a culture clash. The one commonality would be that they're Christians, you know, so you share the same kind of core values. So the level of difficulty in communication is not, and yet, how many times during the day will you have a miscommunication with somebody? You'll walk away thinking, well, I don't know if I really expressed myself very well, because they have that bewildered look in their face, you know, and you're wondering, did they really understand what I just said? Or we could add this word noise in here. There's some noise going on, and noise isn't necessarily the audible kind. It's basically anything that distracts you. You ever talk to someone and they're kind of like, they're looking at you, but they're totally distracted, you know, and they're looking at some other, whatever. So how much of your message is getting through? So anyway, you can imagine then the level of difficulty in a different culture, you know, where you're trying to get a message to someone and you're using terms that they don't understand, or the way that you're using them is different from them. So I think this is very basic, very fundamental. If you just look at the component parts, so you have here a source, which is you. If you're the one with a message, and you say, okay, here I am. Whatever the message is, it doesn't have to be always preaching the gospel message. It doesn't have to be in a missional context, but there's just something you want to communicate to someone. That's you. You're the source. You have something you want to say, whatever that is. Maybe you need information from someone. You need help with something, whatever it is. You encode that. You encode that, and somehow, on some level in your brain, without thinking, you're sort of processing, you know, how do I put this in a way that they're going to get it? You know, and that's all that means is, now that would be relative to who the respondent is, right? It would just be relative to that. In other words, all right, so there's things that, let's say I take one of my sons and his son, you know, so one of my sons is John, he's number four child, and he has Nolan, which I think is number 5 grandchild, somewhere in there. Nolan's 3. I'm going to talk, if I have a message to say, it could be the same message, do you think I'm not going to adapt it differently to Nolan, to the 3-year-old, than I am to the, right? And so this is what you're thinking in this encoding kind of process. Even though you're not thinking, it's not something like you sit down and spend a lot of time in this. Some people don't really. That was the first of the day. Some people don't put a lot of thought into this, or they just assume, right? And they just blurt out. I think sometimes you can be of high intellect or something and throw around a bunch of big words just to impress everybody with your intellect, and you've totally lost everybody. And it's not on them because they didn't understand, it's on you. Right? It's on you because you failed to encode it. And the idea is you have something that you want to say. You know, so you take into account the respondent, and that's all this model says. It says you have something you want to say, you want to communicate it, and that's the message. You want to communicate it in such a way so that the respondent is able to understand. So, can you tell when it doesn't work? You know, like you got something you want to say. You put it out there, and that person is either okay, you know, like this, but you know they're not getting it. And sometimes it's tough that first time around. And when I say first time around, is you're going to put an arrow. Ooh, it almost did something. You're going to put an arrow there and an arrow there because there's going to be a feedback. It's called a feedback loop that we'll see, you know, in a little bit. So you're like throwing this thing out there. You're encoding it, which all that means, it sounds all technical, but all that means is, let me see. I'm going to put this in such a way that that person can understand it. Now watch, because again, take the analogy of the 3-year-old and the 30, how old is John, like 36, 37. So take that, right? But it's the same message. You don't say, well, I have a message, but actually, it'll have to be one message for this one. It's the same message. So how can I put the same message so that this 3-year-old can understand and this adult can understand? Hey, that's tough, right? That's tough. You know how we talk down to little kids, you know? We use, you know, why is he talking to me like this? You know, the kid says. So, you know, this is a challenge. This is a real challenge. And the person over here is decoding it, which is to say, yeah, I think I get what you're saying to me. But you don't know until you get some feedback. You get some feedback. And you find out that they don't understand. Then, like, for example, let me switch because I can do this watching. Just push a button and. Okay, so let's just say you have on the source side somebody who says, I am a Christian. Now, let's not do it that way. Where's my, there you are. Let's just ask it in a form of a question. Let's see if green works better. So here's the source person. And so you're going to ask a question. Are you let's ask a loaded question. Are you a Christian? And that's actually, I should say, that's actually your message in the form of a question, let's say. And the respondent over here, you want some feedback. So the respondent asks this question. Now we have a kind of a loop, right? So you threw this out over here, and this isn't, let me just bring it back this way. And they say, I don't know if you can see this or not, what is a Christian? What's that called? Answering a question with a question, right? So it comes back here. All right, so there's your first foray at the communication loop, right? So here's you, here's this poor suspecting person that's exposed to you, and you say, you throw this out, you know, are you a Christian? What's the, but watch this, right? What's the assumption in the question? No, don't repeat the question. I'm sorry. What does the question assume? That they understand what a Christian is. What he said. Yeah, exactly.
I can ask somebody if they're Christian, and they're like, yeah, I'm Christian, and then you automatically think that they're saying.
But just for the sake of our little simple demonstration here, right? How well did we encode that? Not very well, right? So if our purpose was to, now granted, you know, think about it. You ask that question here on campus, you're safe with that assumption because you pretty well assume, hey, if you're here attending Word of Life Bible Institute or attending Davis College, if you're here, then, you know, you probably wouldn't even ask the question, but, you know, you can assume. But let's say this person, is going to decode this, the average Joe on the street, right? So you're assuming people know. So your assumption was kind of correct because what is a Christian comes back. So that was your first shot, which sunk to the bottom, sort of. But now you've got this great opportunity because they're asking you directly. What's your next shot going to be? Now it starts getting tough. I can make it really tough, but this was easy. Let's say it starts getting tough at this point. That's one feedback loop, one time. And you may not be aware of this, but a lot of times when you're having what you think is like a conversation with someone, you're actually doing this. Yeah. You really are. And you're trying to clarify your position because you sense they don't get it. And then they sense, I don't think this person, and you keep doing this. So not to take a lot of time here, but this will make the point. What do you do now? Now it's sort of like ping pong, because here or whatever you're into. So you hit the first one over, they just hit it back to you, and your turn. How much time do you have to think? Or the ball's going to go right by you. So what comes next? Now you're going to struggle. And this is only the first loop. How are you going to answer that question?
So are you an evangelical Christian?
Oh, man. See, all you did was you didn't simplify, you made it more complex by modifying Christian. Any more than, do you like milk? And somebody says, what's milk? Well, don't you like chocolate milk? Yeah, come on, you just haven't told me what milk is yet. Come on, let's get to there. So what do you have to do? So you've run into a problem. What's the problem? In your head, you're thinking, I don't think this person knows what a Christian is.
Believe in Jesus.
Who is Jesus?
So, yeah, see, right, see? Now look here, Christian. What are you going to say? You use all the tribal language, all the herd language. So what are you going to say? When they ask you what's a Christian, it's not good. It's not good if you are one and you don't know how to answer that. It's brutal. But imagine in your witnessing like that, it's all these assumptions. You just assume people know what all of these Christianese terms are. Just anybody.
How would you respond to?
What? They just ask you a question. What is a Christian?
How would you respond?
He's smart. He's smart. He turns around and asks everybody else.
Yeah, so
Let it be known on video that no one in the classroom can answer the question, what is a Christian?
born again Christian is someone who believes.
No, you can't modify it.
Okay.
You got to get rid of this word.
A follower of Christ.
Oh, yes.
Christ.
That's usually the default. So you can say, a Christian is a follower of, let's just say Jesus.
Yeah, because
And figure
Christ
people.
is very similar to Christian. You're trying to get rid of the
Let's just say Jesus, so it makes it less, right. Well, you could ask that, but you did give them a legitimate answer. Let's just say the assumption, if you say Christ, could be a little technical. If you say Jesus, people will say, oh, I've heard of him. I've heard of Jesus. Let's just go way out on a limb and assume they know the historical Jesus. Jesus existed. Like I've heard of Jesus somewhere along the way. Okay, so let's say then round 2, and we'll quit with 2 because I won't torment you anymore. We'll quit with 2, just at 2. And you imagine doing this in another culture.
Oh, yikes.
Yikes. Okay, so it's like,
Tribal mission.
oh, I know.
Hits you with a spear. It does.
Oh, come on, guys. You don't have, what are you talking about? I've heard of Jesus, but yeah, what does it mean to follow? Right? So now there's another word. Like you're a follower. Think about it for a second. Just think about it in the language, in the vernacular. Think about it. Change this over. So you are now a self-professed follower. You're saying a Christian is a follower of Jesus. How might someone understand that if they didn't grow up in the tribe?
Someone that
Like what is?
Define it.
Yeah, like a follower,
believes. Someone that
a
believes.
follower of.
It's somebody who lives, who tries to look up to living a life like Jesus Christ.
Yep. Yeah, that's well said. That's well said. That makes sense. What you said is a much better way of communicating than follower. You know, a Christian is someone, and of course you can say a lot of things. You know, to have sort of one-to-one correspondence with one word and try to fit it with something else. But when you say it's someone who models their life after Jesus and desires to pattern their life after him, something like that. I mean, think of it another way. Think of it in a very literal sense. What is it literally? What would it be literally to follow Jesus?
Be right behind him all the way.
Yeah. So, I mean, there would have to be a physical person here, and you that just basically are following them. But that's the idea, but only it's meant in a figurative way, right? So, would you agree that this could be challenging?
Yeah.
You know, exactly, 'cause, right? So people write whole books about it, but it could be really challenging. Even in our own culture, I love to have these discussions with people. So I hang out a lot with folks that, Christianity and all things Christian are just not part of their conversation. You know, they haven't grown up in a church. They didn't have a family that where they would have been taken to church or all these kinds of places. And in our society, you wouldn't notice it as much as somebody who's like elderly like me, but you wouldn't notice it as much. Where I've seen this sort of decline, and what I mean by decline, the world's always a messy place. You know, it's always filled with degenerate things and sin and all that. We know that, regardless of the generation. But what's been on the decline is the public presence of Christianity, of religion in general, but of Christianity in particular in this nation. Symbols, Christian symbols, and monuments and statues and signage and crosses on buildings, all this has just been stripped away. And even in the courts, where it's had the 10 Commandments, which is obviously not specifically Christian, right? This goes all the way back to Moses and Judaism. Having that stricken from many of the courthouses and things of this nature. So what I'm saying is that less and less people, less and less Christians are literate. What you're getting here, just from your 2 years at the BI and then, a couple more years here, you're very literate in the Bible. You're very conversant with all things Bible and what the Bible teaches and things of this nature. But your counterparts, your peers out there, oh my, it makes this very difficult, very difficult. So let's just proceed on. Now we get kind of the idea of what we're talking about. And tiny print to read. So I want to talk about some of the more technical aspects of things, because when you take an academic approach to any subject, which is what you do when you come in a classroom, you're taking an academic approach, then you have to get used to certain terms and understanding how those terms relate to that particular discipline. You get that in psychology too, right? You're going to get all these crazy terms that you never heard of before, but it all has relevance to understanding certain concepts. Same thing here. So let's just look at types of sources. So again, the message part, you have a primary, a secondary, and a tertiary source. So if you're writing a paper, you have a primary source, and that's, if you interviewed me, I'm the primary source because you're getting it from the horse's mouth. You're getting it directly. However, a secondary source would be to go to something I've written for you and convince you, like that. So you always are careful about those secondary sources. And in the secondary sources, you go to the footnotes, those little tiny things, or in the bibliography, and you say, I want to check that source myself, just to make sure. And a lot of times you will read that and you'll say, I didn't see that. I didn't get that same opinion. A tertiary source then would be the message received from a secondary source then is passed on to others. And there are people that, for example, there will be, let's take a student that writes a paper, and it's tertiary sources, which are sort of like some online thing, yes, like Wikipedia or whatever, some online thing that is like 2 times removed from the primary source. It's just not trustworthy. I mean, if at the end of the day that's all that you have, some ancient historical event, and all you have is some clay tablet that you have to translate or something from some historian that was 3 centuries after if that's all you have, then you say, that's all I have. That's the best I can go on. But we just have to just sort of note, just have to note the difference between a primary, secondary, and tertiary source. 2 Timothy 2:2, where Paul is writing to Timothy, and he says, the things that you have heard, I'm not going to get this exactly right, but the passage, the things that you've heard of me through many witnesses, the same give then to others. And you get almost this, Paul is telling Timothy, the stuff you heard from me, Timothy, the primary source, now you then as a secondary source, pass it on to others, who then will pass it on to others. They become the tertiary source. So enough said, but just so we appreciate, the difference in sources. Yeah, so here's the passage. And the things that you've heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable people who will also be qualified to teach others, as it moves down. So God then becomes, in this case, the primary source. Paul taught what had been revealed to him as a secondary source, but he did it in his vocabulary, in his style. Timothy then was taught by Paul. He received God's revelation then third hand. So we need to take great care when attempting to deliver a message that originated with God, was inscripturated and now read to us with an intention to relay it to others from an ancient Bible culture to my culture and then to someone else's culture. See, you have to appreciate this a little bit. When we say cross-cultural communication, if it's just any kind of communication. So your other book, Aaron Meyer, deals with like business associations. And so it's great to help business people who are working in innumerable cultures and trying to get their product, their business model communicated such that that other culture can understand. And so that when they communicate it, they don't offend, that culture. Don't you think the Christian has a really tough job? Just on this little demonstration, but it actually is worse than that. It's more difficult than that? Why? Because when you take your Bible, you're already going back to you are trying to understand something in a different culture. And so you have this Bible in English, and you're going back and trying to understand an ancient culture, whether it's ancient Israel or Philistia or Egypt or Assyria or any of those cultures, that are part of the cultural backdrop or context. So you bring that up into the New Testament. You go from Malachi to Matthew, you just jump 400 years, one turn of the page, but 400 years, and you jumped right into first century. You missed Alexander and all of his world domination, and you jumped right into, all of a sudden you're in Rome. What just happened? And now you have a totally different cultural backdrop of that New Testament world. So you're dealing with that, and you're saying, well, okay, I do have a bit of a cross-cultural challenge, even in my own culture, because I have to take this Bible and now make it relevant, the message now, make it relevant. And this is just in your own culture. You're trying to make sense of the Bible in that culture to your present day culture. Now, if you add one more culture to that, it would be another culture. So here comes this Christian who's, pick any place in the world, take sub-Saharan Africa a little bit. I'll just put you in a safer place. Sub-Saharan Africa. So there you are, and drop you off in Kenya, let's say, and there you are. And now you're taking this message, which is buried in some ancient culture. You are understanding it relative to your own culture. Because see, you've got all of those pre-understandings and presuppositions, and you're thinking, yeah, that's how I understand it in my culture. And you want to be sure that you really understand it, so now you can encode it, over here to the respondents in a different culture. So it is a challenge, and it's one that I'm not sure a lot of folks that do short-term mission work and things like that, and they got to really have time, to really prepare well or really appreciate fully. If you're going on a short-term mission, you're trying to understand a little bit more about that culture, about those people, their life situation, what their economy is, what their politics are, what the major religious points of view are. You're basically trying to get a handle on their worldview, and then trying to think, is there some little doorway where I can take the basic elements of the gospel and make it sensible to them in their culture, and you're really at a loss because you're trying to do this and hoping maybe your translator can help with some of that, in that process. But this is the person that would make a career of this, for example. This is a difficult task. Hesselgrave, this is page 43, what is of fundamental importance in Christian communication is that we keep a clear distinction between divine revelation and human experience, intuition, insight, interpretation, and opinion, whether ours or someone else's. It is the message of divine revelation that must be passed on from person to person, from the people of one culture to the people of another culture, and from one generation to generation. Why? Well, otherwise, the gospel becomes the American gospel, something like that, the American gospel. And it would be easy to sort of present it that way, especially if you are an American missionary or an American traveling abroad with a message. See, it's just critical to demonstrate to people that Bible is intended as much for them as it is for me. In other words, it isn't that the only way they can have access to Scripture and the truth of Scripture is through me, to them. Somehow you want to get it going this way, for them directly, and that's basically your job. And this is what Hesselgrave is trying to say here about revelation. That it belongs uniformly to everyone. So talking about respondents and their responses, back to the source, that's us. The respondent is the person to whom you are bringing this message. So for evangelization purposes, a people group. So we should talk about people group for a moment then. So if the respondent then, who are they? You know who you are. And I think maybe you don't, sorry, but maybe you don't. Maybe I don't know who I am. But what I mean by that is stop and think for a moment. How you came by what you claim to know, what you claim to know with such certainty. How did you come by that? What is your context? How do you know? And you work through these things. But then the respondent then is someone who represents a particular people group, ethno-linguistic people group. So, for example, this is Joshua Project here. Yep. And there's a lot of resources here, but one of the things that are very helpful that would be, several years ago we had, there were many Burmese, because of the violence in Burma, there were many Burmese that were seeking refuge in other parts of the world. With the United States, there was a group in Albany, I believe. There was a group in Buffalo, and they had these like refugee areas. So we had a group of about 8 students that were Burmese. And it was interesting. I actually, I went on the site, opened up the map that showed, because even within Burma, you'd see all these little green dots, with all the different ethno-linguistic groups just within Burma. And I wanted to know precisely what his group was. And he showed me. And he showed me even on the map where he and his family fled, from danger, and kind of his whole story. And I think this is part of the consideration is just to understand that people groups exist, and just here, for example. So here is a woman, right? And so she is of a particular people group within India. So I've been to India several times, and if ever you're in a situation and you think like, wow, it's crowded. This is really crowded. You go to India. India, it's absolutely inundated with people, right? So you pass all these people, and yet, look at, out of the 1 billion plus people, here's 18 million are of this particular people group. And so they're of Hindu sort of practices, but even within Hinduism, there are a lot of permutations. That's a lot of differences within Hinduism, and unreached. Just one question he answers here. What distinguishes one people group from another? Ideally, people group would always be defined to mean all individuals in the group understand each other reasonably well, cultural relationship to each other. In other words, you might call them an affinity group. There are certain things that they have in common that pull that group together. And you begin to realize that people groups refer not to national boundaries. Because there are just thousands and thousands of people groups, but there's only hundreds, 250, 270 countries. And so you have, you could have people groups that overlap different countries. And you see, if you're thinking like, well, this person's German, this person's Belgium French, this person's from the Congo or something, then you tend to sort of put a national boundary and associate that person with the politics and the culture and the economics or whatever the thing is for that particular country, not realizing that there are people groups within, like just take the United States, for example, and you have a lot of ethnic groups that are affinity groups right here in the United States that would not share necessarily certain cultural values and identify freely with maybe other Americans that are here. So it's important just to recognize, the idea of people groups. And so I was in Germany. I have I don't know if I told you. So I have a nonprofit in Poland, and then we fund that with about 80 churches in Germany. So I've been to Germany quite a bit. There's a huge Turkish population. So I was in Cologne, Germany, and this is far western border of Germany. Big cathedral there and such. So someone was giving me a little tour. It's like Hershey, Pennsylvania. They've got this chocolate factory. So they took me on this tour of this chocolate. It's awesome. But it's a beautiful, ancient kind of European city. And I started noticing all these kebab. You ever see these things, the kebab stuff with the meat and all that's right? They're all over the place, and they're all run by Turkish people, and it's always great stuff. You can just grab it and get a few kilometers out of it. It'll take you for the rest of the day. So I was introduced to one who was telling me about a little network of Turkish Christians. They took me to this place that night where they were all getting together and having a Bible study and things like that. And so I thought, this is kind of interesting, because you go into Germany and you're thinking of the stereotypical German person, and then you find out, oh, wait a minute. Now, since all of the upheavals in Europe, and you've had a lot of migration, biggest migration since World War II in Europe, 1 million Ukrainians now have crossed the border into Poland. And many of them evangelical in a non-evangelical country. It's amazing, right? So you've got this catastrophic thing going on in the world that causes the migration of 1 million evangelical believers into a non-evangelical Poland. What is that going to do for the future of the church in Poland as these people are now, the Ukrainian refugees are evangelizing the Poles? It's wild, but this is all, and 500,000. Wow, if I'm going to be wrong on that statistic, into Germany, such that they began to say about many of the European countries. At what point are those countries not the majority of the ethnicity by which they were known? It literally is changing the maps. In essence. So all I'm saying is that you have to get away from a lot of assumptions in communication. That's the best thing, is just get away of all these assumptions and begin to try to train yourself to speak not in kind of Christianese or all that tribal language, but start asking yourself, what did I mean by what I just said? And doing that, I've had to do this at great pains myself, through the years. And when I've had to stand with translators especially, so someone's translating, you want to be sure you're saying exactly what you mean. Like when you stated what a follower of Jesus is, that would have more impact on a person than just the word follower. But see, we'll use these terms, and in fact, we're saying, but that's biblical. You know, Jesus said, follow me, and we get all this, we know it's a biblical term, but how do we take what is meant by the term? And I'm telling you, the more you use that terminology right here in the United States, right here with your own peer group, it's much more powerful with them and much more powerful even with other Christians. And then it's more challenging. It's easier to sort of, to go on this follow thing. Isn't it easier to say, yeah, I'm a follower, I'm a Christ follower? Because that's, in fact, that's what Christianoi, Christianoi in the Greek, that's what it means. It's someone who's an adherent, a practitioner of what that guy taught, you follow in that way. But imagine you go around and say, yeah, well, I want to model my life after his. Now, there's a reason why. There's a reason why. It's because he died for me. He forgave me. So I want to model my life after him. And then it becomes a question every day. Am I doing it? Is that really who I am? Am I just saying this, or am I representing it? Let's take a look at this.
Understanding the remaining mission task. Who has already heard the good news about Jesus, and who is still waiting to hear it for the first time? Nearly 10% of the world's population are committed followers of Jesus, who believe Jesus is who he said he is, and who have given their lives to him. They believe anyone can know God through Jesus, and they tell people around them about him. Many other people also identify as Christians. These other Christians need deeper faith in Jesus and a personal relationship with God through him. About 33% of the world's population identify themselves as Christians. But where do the world's Christians live? The good news of Jesus is spreading in the world, but not evenly. First, let's divide the world into regions by population, then show where the Christians live. Two countries, India and China, each have 1/5 of the world's population, so they will get their own section. The Muslim majority countries also get their own section because they are similar to each other. There are other Asian countries and other non-Muslim majority countries in Africa. Here's Europe's population, and North America lumped with all the Pacific Island countries, including Australia and New Zealand. And finally, Latin America from Mexico south. In each region, let's show the followers of Jesus and the others who identify themselves as Christians. Latin America has the highest total percentage of Christians, followed by North America and the Pacific. Europe has many nominal Christians, while non-Muslim Africa has many committed followers of Jesus. Today, China has also many committed followers of Jesus. Other Asian countries average about 1/3 Christian, including Korea and the Philippines. Some Muslim majority countries have had Christian people groups for centuries. Of all the large areas of the world, India has the lowest percentage of Christians. As you can see, the Christians are not even...
Do you see how, just listening to her, you've heard committed Christians, nominal Christians, right? And then the distinction between followers of Jesus and Christians, right? So already you're having a little communication spasm, already just listening to that. And you can go, yeah, okay, I hear you, I understand, because you understand all the words. But what is she really saying in that so far? I mean, what is she saying without getting into, where do all the, what is she implying strongly just by how she presents this information, this little pie chart?
Like the lighter color, so the people that know of or are considered Christians, and then the darker yellow is people who actually follow and actually live it out.
Yeah, so if you go deeper into her brain, the one that's speaking, you're thinking, how does she understand these terms, Christian, followers of Jesus? It's almost like, here's the authentic, here's one that's authentic because they're followers of Jesus. And where you have even other Christians are separate, she can call them like committed and nominal. What would it be to be a nominal Christian? Nominal anything. What is it? Anybody?
Is that you say you are a Christian, but you're not
Living
Yeah,
living it out very much?
yeah. You wear the label.
Would Catholic fall under that as well, or no?
Yeah, see, it's a great discussion. She provokes a great discussion because, first of all, instead of just accepting everything, you say, is that a fair, are these fair categories? Are these biblical categories? So you'd say, well, we know that is because it's sort of a textbook definition of we say a committed Christian. So let me break it down this way. When you use the word Christian, you are using a label for a world religion, right? And so a lot of people who are Christians think, this isn't a religion. This isn't a religion. It's a relationship. It's not a religion. Religion is where people are trying to make their way to God, and here's a system. But Christianity is how God made his way to us. So it's a complete reversal. We understand that, but demographers and people that study religion, they'll say, here's Islam, here's Buddhism, here's Judaism, here's Christianity, and they will study them as all meeting the same definition of religion. They have an ethical system. They have places where they meet. They have rituals that they perform. They have doctrines that they believe. And you see all categorical, right? So you say, well, if Christianity, sure, we all fit within those categories. So demographically, you'd say that how many people in the world say that they self-identify with that religion in one way or another? If you do some research and say the Barna group, right? So go into the Barna group, and they'll make a further distinction here and say, like, churched and unchurched. Have you heard that? Churched and unchurched. Okay. What do you think the demographic statistic is for someone who is churched? Like let's say in the United States they say that there's maybe 60% unchurched, the unchurched. And then there's the church. Well, what do you have to be in that 40% statistic? Well, if you look at the tiny print, which you always want to do on the polls, look at the tiny print, you have to attend church twice a year. Twice a year, and now you're one of the churched. How happy are you about that statistic now, right? So you're saying, wow, this is great, we live in a nation that has this many, and they're church. So there's all different ways to understand Christians, and I can show you some tons of comparative statistics, about all these religions. But within Christianity, there's that sort of mega block. We speak of religions as a mega block. So Christianity is one of those because a whole bunch of people say, I'll wear that label, for whatever reason. Someone might say, yes, I'm a Christian. Well, I thought all Americans were, so I guess that's what I am, or they had parents or a grandparent, or maybe they, if I ever went to a church, I'd walk into a Christian church, I guess. I wouldn't go to a mosque. I wouldn't go to a synagogue, so I guess I'm Christian. Well, that's categorically different then, right? So you'd have to, and what is the way to really define whether someone has a personal relationship with God through faith in His Son? and someone professes to that. I mean, that's so simple, right? But that's the simplicity of it. But many wouldn't understand it. So when you come to our Catholic friends, right, there isn't there wouldn't be a one simple answer. And I have a lot of Catholic friends. It basically comes down to, I'll give you for example. So I have like this First Fridays thing where we just invite in whoever, so I had, there's one fella there who is Catholic, and he comes. And we have the most interesting discussions because I don't really do any labels or anything like that. I'm just saying, well, look, this is how the Bible describes what a Christian is in terms of a believer, someone who is relying fully on Jesus and what he has done to make us forgiven and to put us in right standing with God and a relationship with God like this. And, he will keep trailing back to things like either it's Mary or it's the Apocrypha or it's all these different things, right? And so I said, well, those are all interesting discussions, but I'm more concerned with the core issue. Now, let's just deal with the core issue. And some Catholics are more more open to that, but by and large, they tend to put their reliance in the church and in a number of other things. But it is difficult. You have to have an honest discussion with them to find out what they truly believe and why they believe that, like you would with anyone. But I think it's important to.
World. Today, most Christians live in the Americas, Europe, or sub-Saharan Africa. In each region, the committed followers of Jesus can renew the faith of the other Christians and can tell the non-believers in their own people groups about Jesus. Let's call these people culturally near non-believers and show them as green. These non-believers are their relatives, neighbors, and co-workers who speak, eat, and dress like them. In China, hundreds of millions of non-believers are now culturally near to followers of Jesus. 40% of the world's non-believers have many Christians in their own people groups who can reach out to them without learning a new language or culture. So their groups are called reached people groups, because the good news is spreading there. Believers in China have a challenging job to share the gospel with so many non-believing relatives and neighbors. Yet thankfully, they can do it in their own language. In the reached people groups, committed followers of Jesus can encourage the other Christians in their families and communities to become fully committed to Jesus.
It's amazing. You see, the more you listen, you see that, like where she said that there are these committed Christians and they're in a position where they can help renew the faith of these others. They can help renew the faith. And I listen to what somebody isn't saying sometimes, or sort of not saying directly, but that sort of, this is a way of trying not to make a hard distinction or basically, determine like the spiritual condition of others, which in essence is never a wise thing to do. You get the idea of those places in the world where now there are pockets of Christians, and now there are those that are culturally near. So one of the advantages is that if you had a place where there were no Christians and someone had to go, they're really not culturally near because you're not part of that culture. And this was, 2 centuries ago. All the pioneer missionaries, the ones that Piper was talking about, those people that launched out into new places where Christ was unknown. We'll see the case of like Don and Carol Richardson, who went with New Tribes basically started first Christians anybody ever saw among these tribes, developed language with them so they could communicate with them, and so on, all these things.
They can also tell the many culturally near non-believers in their own people group about Jesus without learning a new language and culture.
So I've done this for years in Poland, for example, because Poland is a largely Catholic country. And so our strategy has been to begin with kids. And now I've got kids that we started with, they're 45 now with their own families, right? So that was our strategy directly, was to start with the young ones through camp kind of ministry, stay active in their life, and then, we have these multiple groups in multiple cities. But it was a two-pronged, and most of these were Catholic kids coming in. And Polish Catholicism is, it's not nominal like here in the United States. It's very, very strong. And so the fact that the parents would give us access, so our organization is not connected with any church. We're just a totally independent mission agency, but we don't even refer to ourselves as that per se. We go into communities and hold events and build relationships with either the mayor or local teachers and educators and schools in that community to gain some respect and rapport with them. And then we begin to do things with kids, develop relationships with the parents so that they'll understand the gospel independently of a church. So it doesn't become all about right or wrong with this church or that church. It just becomes the merits of the gospel. And so we'll leave that off here and pick up next time.